Hello everyone, my name is Taylor Resvani and I'm an assistant professor at Husson University. In this lesson we will talk about creating presentations. So when creating a presentation, the first piece to look at is the text. So what is included in the presentation? And it's important to make sure that this text is relevant and that there is a framework, so a pathway that you are laying out for your audience around what the key ideas are when they are talking. It's important to use accessible language throughout, and we want to be mindful that the audience can only take in so much information at a time. So as you are including this text on the visual side on the actual slides, you are then filling in information, further language and information with your narration of the slides in creating this pathway of key ideas for your audience to follow. So how do we lay this out for our audience? We want to avoid the word soup. So it is important that the text is really a right fit with the goals. And this might mean that there is only one slide in your presentation, or it might mean that there are many. In general, it's good to use bullet points to pull out the key ideas rather than the paragraphs. And you really don't even need to be using full sentences here. You want to be very succinct and have a maximum of 6 bullet points and a maximum of 6 words per bullet point. So you are really working on keeping these ideas tight so that your audience can follow along. This might mean that you need to use more slides in order to break up your presentation into digestible parts rather than cramming it all into one slide that is harder for them to navigate. You want to use a minimum 18-point font. This is important so that your audience is able to engage with the written text on the visual, and have a color contrast as well. And it's important to note that some images are very powerful on their own and no text is needed. So also you can think about that piece and consider, is the text needed? Is it going to be helpful here? When you are looking at this color contrast between the text and the images that you use, there are different tools that you can use to test this and evaluate this, but it's important to make sure that your text is really popping out from the background image. So you can use something like on this slide, how there is the white rectangle to help give that background and support the contrast. You want to remember to keep it to one big idea per slide. So again, rather than cramming in multiple ideas on a slide, try and split those up so that we have one area of focus. And again, it is possible to have a slide that does not have any text at all. So for the visuals, what do you want to include in the visuals? The first thing to consider is the content, of course, and you want the content to be meaningful. If I was giving a presentation on lizards, then I might choose an image such as this. However, for this particular slide, this content doesn't quite fit with what the goal is, and so that makes it a little harder for the audience to make meaning from what you are communicating, and it causes a bit more of a distraction rather than a help. You also want to consider the aesthetic. So does the aesthetic give what you intend? And sometimes this might be a calming effect, but sometimes you might want it to be more jarring and abrasive. So really looking at what colors are in there, what tones are used, and you want to maintain this consistently throughout your presentation. Again, you might go into places where certain slides are more vibrant or impactful on purpose, but you do want to have this consistent tone and aesthetic that runs through your presentation so that it's not jarring and surprising as you shift between different slides. And you might maintain this consistency through a color palette or by a specific design aesthetic, way that you are using the images. There are multiple ways to maintain this consistency visually. So what types of things do you want to consider when looking at how to integrate the visuals into your presentation? The first thing is the placement. Is this going to be a full background image like the one that I have here? Are you going to use it as a smaller image? Will there be multiple images? And how will you place those throughout in a way that is, again, supportive of the learning of your audience? You want to be very mindful that it is not detracting and distracting, but is adding to their understanding. We are going to take a quick little detour to look at this how-to. If you're using PowerPoint, these tools can be helpful in knowing how to really work with the specific images. So you do want to be mindful of referring to the text in your narration as you integrate that into your project, and align the color as well as the content. So here I have some images of the banner that you might find on PowerPoint. It might look a little different on your version of PowerPoint, but you can use these tools that are found here to manipulate the image in a way so that you can control the spacing, minimize the clutter and the complexity that we are visually faced with as an audience. Adjusting the size and the transparency, all of these pieces can be really helpful as you are moving through. So up here, we can look at the ordering of the objects in this first arrow. So if you want the text to be on top of the image versus the other way around, that is what you control here. This sending backwards, if I pull an image into my PowerPoint, but it covers something up that I don't want it to cover, then I can send it backwards, either all the way to the back or just behind one item. So this is a nice tool to have available. You can also flip the object. So here, this little triangle, if you click on that, it will flip it horizontally, vertically. So if you want to change the orientation at all, maybe you want to include an image of a horse and you want the horse's face to be facing the other direction, then this is the tool that you could use. Also cropping, so that is what you see here. So you can cut parts off if you want to have the image fit the whole background of the slide. You can make it bigger, but there might be then parts that hang off the edges of the slide and you can crop those off to make your file size smaller. So being really deliberate about all of these pieces, how you are layering what on top of what, how you are sizing them. Also this transparency piece as you are doing the layering. Do you want to see a bit of the image back behind the text, or do you want it to be a solid opaque text box up on top? If you want to adjust the transparency, you can go into this format pane and then go to this little picture of a mountain up here and down to transparency, and that's how you can adjust how transparent you want your image to be. And you can do that with your text boxes as well, or any shapes that you add to your slide. It's important to remember to keep the aspect ratio consistent throughout. So up here, this aspect ratio, you want to have it locked in so that you're not distorting the image at all as you are using it. When you're presenting, you want to be thinking about your pacing of your delivery, your language, how you are really moving through delivering the information and how it aligns with what your audience is seeing visually. So this is really how you marry your delivery with your slide deck. And you want to maintain that accessible audience-specific language. Who are you presenting to, and how can you deliver that audience-specific language in the appropriate tone and professionalism required for that scenario? Pace yourself. Sometimes it can be a bit tedious to go too slow. It can be a lot of information that's hard to process if you're going too fast and can leave the audience behind. So really finding that middle ground of what is the appropriate pacing for your goals for the presentation. One last thing we're going to look at is an example format. So there might be specific indications to structure a presentation in a certain way. So for example, the pecha-kucha, which is a format that indicates that you must use 20 slides and you can only spend 20 seconds per slide. And the focus of this is really on the visuals. So this is a very strong format to use when visuals are valuable in supporting the presentation. And one of the things that I think is really beneficial about this type of presentation is that it really requires deliberate distillation down to the key ideas for your presentation. And really looking at your audience only has 20 seconds to process everything that they see and hear on this single slide. So how can you really keep those focused on key ideas? And you likely would end up with 50 slides you wanted to include. How can you pare that down to the 20 that are the most important? So it really has this wonderful way of aiding in the curation of your presentation. And I think even if you are not doing this specific format, those are important pieces to consider carrying forward into other formats of presentation as well. Is this really necessary? Is this really adding to the presentation? And if not, maybe we decide to leave it out. As always, there are specific instructions for your assignments. Reach out to your instructor for any questions that you have or specifics regarding your course or your instructions. Thank you.